Welcome, everyone. Everybody hopefully has their information for our meeting this afternoon. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion? Okay. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye. Okay. We don't have the minutes, so we'll skip that. And board membership announcement. Who's going to? Do we want to do that now?
We don't ever want to do it.
We don't want to tell anybody this.
No, because maybe if we don't talk about it, it won't happen.
I know. Just want to, I guess, say at this time that Charles Vines, our good friend from Mitchell County, is going to be stepping down from the board today. And Charles, we really miss you. We have a lot of respect for you, as you well know. Just want to say that at this time. Okay, committee assignments. Hold right there. Tell them, Teresa.
We just also need to, we will have to discuss with the full board the fact that what the board had agreed to was that Chuck would take over as chair this year. And Rick has agreed to continue to be the chair for another year, but the board will have to approve that today at the meeting. And we're going to propose a slight revision to the bylaws to allow that to happen.
Okay. Our next item on the agenda is community and capital reinvestment resolution. I don't have that.
It's really, we're just giving you a heads up about that. We're gonna, Brad, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, Brad, you want to talk about that?
Have the resolution ready for the board and finance committee meeting.
There is a resolution before the board to do a realignment of some of the investments that have currently been approved and reviewed. Specifically, what's the medication's name?
Naloxone.
Naloxone. The request has been made to break that out separately, so that will be done. Some additions in terms of the expo exceed the expense of the original allocation, so there'll be realignments like that. Nothing huge, but the fact of the matter is once you have hard figures, some things need to change.
We have some of this is what has already been approved, and there are some additional components to it. And there's a very well done summary in your packet. Technically, because we're not using state funds for any of this, it doesn't require any permission. I think that the board's approval, anything we're doing at this level, we can do that. But because it's Medicaid savings, it's a little different. So that's worth noting. We really have filled out areas of need and programming that we think would be very, very needed and effective. Something for everybody in there. Now, the one caveat with it, last year in the budget bill, there were single stream reductions both for this fiscal year and next fiscal year. About $14 million for us this year, $112 million, and then it's about $21 million next year, or the $150 million statewide. There was also an option for the General Assembly to offset that reduction with the excess, well, I guess we would really say, based on how the Medicaid rebates have been budgeted, there was in fact a surplus there that they could put money back in to that reduction of $150 million. Whether they will do that or not, I don't know. Those are all the moving parts. There's a lot of objections over this reduction, both for this year and for next year. That's why we spent a good bit of the introduction of this document to explain what this is all about. The reality is, in terms of the General Assembly, there's not a lot of folks who were necessarily around when, you know, this started, or who were engineers, let's say, of that, you know, the original waiver initiative. But if you go and ask a Tara Larson or a Lanier Chancellor, you know, they would tell you the kind of conversations that occurred between the state and CMS around the procurement, right? So just think about this for a second. And a couple of years ago, this question raised its head again, because CMS was concerned that it was a government-to-government type of contracting scenario. And how could that be acceptable? Well, one, it was a competitive process. Not everybody made it, right? Because some, we'll say, didn't quite pass muster on the RFP review. And then another facet about it that was very positive was that there would be guaranteed reinvestment. And we're not a private company. We don't take the savings from Medicaid and pay dividends or do things other than what we're talking about right here with, okay? So that was part of the original deal. If you go and take 110 million, take 150 million out of that and use it for other purposes, what you're doing is, in net, you know, you're reducing the amount of reinvestment that's possible. Well, it's great that we all go and, you know, tap our fund balance to go replace it, but we're out, the system and individuals are out that 110 and 150 million bucks. Now, you know, if 100 million of it was state fund balance in origin, they have the authority to take that. They do. It's their money. But once you get past that, there's no more state funds left. So it's really Medicaid savings, and you can see we put a little, just added one sentence about just that this is inconsistent with the original intent of how this was supposed to work. In all the media articles and all the stuff you hear, many of the points that we make in here are lost. So it's very important that folks understand that. And also how much of the fund balance is baked in. It was like 62 million bucks. It's there, it's in the lockbox. We keep, you know, we have to have it there. We can't do anything other than what it's intended for. And again, that's another part that, you know, is kind of lost in the big headlines about, oh, the LME MCOs collectively have, you know, 800 million bucks or something. Well, you know, probably 60% of it or more is locked down. You can't do anything with it. And the pace. You know, again, we tell our story here. Could we have done anything any sooner than we did? No. I mean, I asked for an extra 6 months. You know, when we first came into Western, I can remember being over at a meeting, I don't know that you were there, Mandy, but there were county folks, and actually Curtis was there, and some mission people talking about, you know, it was like a crisis services thing, probably Rich Longer. And, you know, he got about 10 minutes into me, he was like, man, we just got to get out of 356. And the only way anything is ever going to get any better or any different here is if we free up that space. And I said, just give us 6 months, you know, because we have a lot of work to do just to get stabilized. And, you know, great. We're pretty good about that. You know, as soon as that period was up, you know, we started spending and investing, and, you know, and you see here the laundry list of all the things we're going to do. So could we have done anything sooner? No, we couldn't. But again, this isn't part of the story. You know, these aren't the sound bites, these aren't the headlines, the incendiary kind of comments that happen at the Legislative Oversight Committee. You know, so we really work very hard to tell the whole story in this plan. And in fact, have been asked to submit, each of the LME MCOs have been asked to submit their, we call it a community and capital reinvestment plan to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee, who just had a heyday with all of this when they last met. Again, omitting many key features. And it was disappointing that the DHHS representatives didn't clarify many of the important things that would have helped everyone's understanding. We did have a meeting with the Secretary about that. So anyway, it's a lot of talking about what you have here. You breeze through it. Any questions? We'll talk about this in board meeting, but I want to kind of give you the whole backstory on this. Did I leave anything out?
No, I think the only thing I would say is that in the resolution itself, what I discussed with Amanda earlier today is that we would leave a little wiggle room because these cost amounts that are identified, these are estimates of what we think the projects will cost, and certainly there's the potential that one project will cost $25,000 more and one will cost $25,000 less. So what we're asking is that the board approve a resolution a transfer of up to a specific amount from the fund balance to be used on these projects or any other projects that we may specifically identify within that total fund balance allocation. So we want to leave a little bit of wiggle room so that we're not stuck, because we have had some issues with the last resolution we did where we...
Too precise.
Yeah, we were just too specific, and that meant we had to keep coming back to you every time the amount adjusted.
Now, another feature with this, if you look at the top of, we didn't number the pages, but it's maybe the third to last page at the top. Let me just read this part. Assuming our fund balance projections remain stable, we plan to remain deeply engaged with our communities, additional reinvestment, currently meeting with representatives in 23 counties. As a matter of fact, so I made a point of telling me a really good project we want to do in Alexandria with the Public Health Department. However, a number of factors outside our control will affect the viability of these projects. So we sort of have the A list, and then this is the B list. Factors such as development time, annual negotiation around capitation rates, potential funding cuts, increased business operation costs, legislative and policy changes, future mergers. All of these things change our financial picture. We are a very, very dynamic company when it comes to our income and expense, in part because it is the nature of our business. We're an at-risk insurance company that gets a different check each month based on population and eligibility, and then operate within that. And we are also in the food chain like everybody else, with the General Assembly, who can change things based on a language and a vote. So can we say for sure that we can do all of these things in Part B? No, we can't. And we're just trying to say that just as plainly as we can. So again, in a resolution, whatever sort of nuance we would want there to be around that would be important. And not the least of which, the message that, hey, it's one thing if you take $21 million from us next year. If you don't, this certainly gives us a lot more confidence in being able to do all of these things. So, that make sense? Okay. Now, I don't know in terms of language, Tracy or Fred, how we articulate that, but that would be an important component.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
We're trying to come up with something that's flexible.
Okay. Any questions on anything? And again, we'll talk about them to whatever extent anybody wants to.
I just wonder, on the expansion, and I know this is on the future list, but expansion of medication-assisted treatment for opioids. Is that a conversation looped in with mission? I mean, the flip of that is the system impact we're seeing with the number of infants born with
That's what
the
we're-
methadone exposure. I mean,
Right,
it's huge. And we're working with MAHAC on kind of prevention embedded model in the high-risk clinic, but I just wondered, those conversations.
We're trying to connect them up. It's been in every county meeting. I know Mission and both Big Black Point have both approached us about just what's going on in the communities. The health department, pretty much everyone, the assessments. I mean, I think we probably, maybe you would agree, we see it sort of as an epidemic with these women. It's really unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
It is. It's really a crisis. It's like you know it's out there, and then the more you dig into it, it's pretty horrific. So I think that's one of the things we're very committed to in the community projects. I mean, these are two of our gaps, but I think we're all, that's what I was saying to your staff yesterday, Jim, was that everybody's really talking about the same things. Everybody's trying to prioritize the same things in about every room. So I think that we're committed that when things like this roll out, we have conversation, we need to bring those other partners and really build on what's either already established or how do we contribute, either financially or whatever, to best leverage that money to add to things.
Yeah,
So,
it's really a continuum of things.
right.
We're doing in the lock zone.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about who those targeted agencies were.
Well, here's how this works, and Steve and his folks have been, really on point with this. The Harm Reduction Coalition is, pretty well established, and we know about them. They have what seems to be a really great distribution network. And the way they go about doing this is to, they seem to be able to keep track of expiration dates. So they use that as a priority to go and backfill, all the places where it's available.
So places available, where are we talking, EMS, law enforcement, emergency?
All of the above.
All of the above. There are law enforcement agencies, the sheriff's department being one that have resisted being a distribution point. So I just wonder how that's.
I didn't see it last night. I was telling Steve, I saw the little teaser to it. There was a thing on the news. Was that the city police department?
Both the city and county have felt like in our community, EMS is a first responder more qualified for that. And they don't view that as a liability law enforcement. They feel like there are liability issues.
Well, the story was that they were going to that they were going to have it available. But I didn't hear the whole story.
Well, I mean, Dan, I'm sure those conversations have happened because that is there is a task force that's been meeting, and that may only be specific to Baltimore. So I just wondered about that because I absolutely wholeheartedly support the availability. There's no question
Well,
about
if you're
that. It
dead,
saves
you're
lives.
not going to have much of a chance of
That's
recovery.
right, I'm with you.
Some of the police forces were concerned about the liability because it was the use of a needle. What we're distributing is the nose spray.
The debate I've heard in our community is that the sheriff has always said that the EMS director has authority to decide where the distribution is going, and that they've always jointly agreed that only being the first responders. I'm not saying that's still true. I probably hadn't had that conversation in a year with them, but I'm just wondering what, I don't want them to see it and say, what is that?
I'm going to go, when we quit here, I'm going to go on the WOLS website and just see what the story was about last night.
Okay,
See if they-
well, that's okay, yeah. I'm
So
sure those
we have-
conversations
So
are
we have
happening.
that, and this is all,
This
so much
is a
of
great
this is part
list,
of
let me
the,
just tell you, yay.
Yeah.
This is like the Santa
yeah.
list I would have written if
Christmas,
I got
Christmas
there.
came either early or late,
That's
depending on.
right.
But we have that, and then we have medication-assisted treatment, and then these other things that we're, being just hit in the head with about going out in the counties and, the number of young women
Oh,
at the health department that are, involved with prenatal activity, that are using, and, all that goes with that, so.
Brian, did you mention the U.S. Attorney's?
I'm go there have?
The what?
You'll see on there, there's an amount to help support the, I don't know if you've seen in the news, but the U.S. attorney, the new.
Yeah, I
indicted
did
US
see that.
Wants to do the heroin summit.
Absolutely.
So we
It's
reached-
epidemic.
Yeah, we reached out to their office, and a representative from their office came and met with us. So Dr. Martin and some of our other staff are going to do a panel presentation in the afternoon. And he indicated he had met with law enforcement in Buncombe County that same day, and that it's really focused towards law enforcement and sort of education around stigma and other things. So we are going to be supporting that and being a part of that.
I think that's great. There's nothing on here that's not great.
Yeah. Okay.
Just not free.
Okay. The next item is rebranding.
Well, let's see, I'll give you the short version, then maybe we'll talk a little bit about it later. It's going great.
Thank you for the update, okay? Next item. That's all you want to say? Steve's not going to the inside now, okay? All right. Okay. Well, at this time, I guess it's a closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318, 11A1, in order to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged and confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 122C through 126.1 are not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes, to consult with attorneys pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318, 11A3. Is there a motion for a closed session?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay.
Yeah.
I know, you do fine when they're wheelchair accessible. I know. I guess they
Okay,
don't
where
think
did
they
our
have to need
back,
that.
what did you?
You're not gonna read them?
I know.
No respect.
You ready for us to do this, Jill?
Excuse me?
Are you ready for us to?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Everybody's had a chance to look at the minutes of the executive committee meeting from December the 10th. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Is there any other business? Nothing on the agenda, seeing none. Is there a motion for adjournment of the executive committee meeting? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right. Thank you. We have the floor. You ready to go, Jerry?
Yeah, ready to go.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First item of business is approval of the agenda. Has everybody had a chance to look at the agenda?
I have one amendment to propose, and that is the internal review that will be added to the agenda.
Okay, where in the review?
It would be after budget revisions.
It'd be called internal.
Let's see. And Amanda, I had printed those out, but I don't think I brought them in here. Wait a minute. Excuse me.
I can read some.
Oh, wait a minute. Hang on.
What did I do?
I think I did print them out, sorry. I got too many. I do have, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
There's one more handout.
I guarantee you it's a cure for insomnia.
All right.
Although Amanda might say it might be a cause of migraines.
Oh, sure. I
got one for you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Okay, is there
Thank
a
you.
motion to approve the agenda as amended? Okay. Nancy, made a motion, Charles second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Approval of the December 10, 2015 Finance Committee minutes. Everybody had a chance to review the minutes. Is there a motion?
Second.
He said he wasn't here.
Oh,
I can't.
You make the motion?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Yeah.
All in favor, say aye.
All right.
Okay. Did you get that, Jill?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Fred. December financial reports.
So the financials to be reviewed are as of December 31st, so we're talking about the first 6 months of the operating year, so half the year's gone by. Oh, joy. During the balance sheet first, under assets,
It was just him.
cash checking and interest account stands at $85.4 million. Cash reserve now stands at 21.7. And the investment in North Carolina Management Trust currently stands at 14.3, rounding up. So the total assets as of December 31st stands at $137,196,703. On the liabilities part of the balance sheets, the accounts payable currently stands at $9.2 million, and the accounts payable, IBNR Medicaid at 19.6 million. So the total liabilities for the period as of December 31st stands at 29.8 million. I will not go through the details of the fund balance per se, but I will review a few items under unassigned. Current year Medicaid stands at 6.3 million, thereabouts. What this stands for is revenue over expense for the first full 6 months of the operating year. Under that, you will see the title, which you've seen before, current year other fund sources. And you'll see a negative number there. And you'll say, what is that about? Please recall that given the single stream reduction, that we have been asked to backfill in terms of using fund balance for the amount of the reduction itself. The use of fund balance is not a revenue source. Let me repeat that. The use of fund balance dollars is a budget item, but it is not a revenue source. So therefore, when you add state and other local funds, and you come up with a negative balance, given that we're asked to replace the dollars for single stream replacement, it is accounted for in the context of payments and cash, but in terms of the balance sheet, it will end up being a negative money because fund balance dollars are not a revenue source. So you will continue for the balance of the year to see a negative number in that category. Questions about that? Because I know it's hot.
Yeah, a lot of county folks will love that.
So the total liabilities and fund balance currently stands as of December 31st at $137,196,703. I will review the statements under analysis of revenue and expenditures. It will be the grouping under Medicaid, total Medicaid. The Medicaid service dollars as of December 31st, revenue stands at $136.1 million, expenses at $131 million. So revenue over expense on the service side of Medicaid for the period stands at $5.1 million. On the administrative side, revenue stood at $17.5 million, expenses at $14.3. So revenue over expense for the period at approximately $1.2 million. So total revenue over expense on the Medicaid side stood at $6.3 million for the period. Moving to the next column grouping under total state and federal. On the service revenue side, it stood at $29.1 million. Expenses at $33.4. Notice expenses exceeded revenue by $4.3 million. Again, this is due to single stream replacement. The fund balance dollars we are using are not a revenue source, so that will appear in this period and all succeeding periods as a loss. On the administrative side, revenue stood at $1.3 million. Expenses again exceeded it at 3.2, so expenses over revenue at 1.8. So total expenses over revenue on the state and federal side stood at $6.1 million. Again, this will be accounted for by appropriated dollars for single stream replacement for the period. Moving to the last column under total, all sources. Total revenue for under services stood at $169.2 million, expenses at $166.3. So revenue over expense for the period stood at $2.9 million. On the administrative side from all sources, revenue stood at $19.6, expenses at $19.5. So this is an instance in which revenue over expense by a little over $100,000. So total revenue over expense for the period is just under $3 million. Again, notice the difference in terms of the sources. And that is, while on the Medicaid side, revenue over expense is 6.1, that is not the case on the state and federal side. We will make up the difference in terms of fund balance utilization. It is not a revenue source to use fund balance dollars, but this is what it appears as far as profit and loss for the period as a result thereof. Again, you will see this number be very peculiar for the course of the year because, quite honestly, from an accounting point of view, it's very odd to account for. But I'm certainly open to questions.
Would you, I know you'll say something about tonight, full board, would you say a little bit more about the fund balance because county folks are used to fund balances? I mean, I used to have a commissioner that thought it was not fund balance, it was fund balance, but that's another story.
Fund?
Fund balance. Yeah.
F-U-N-D, yes.
Yeah, so just, there's your, anyway.
Yes, I will be careful of that.
You got a smile out of Jerry on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, reviewing the final formal financial statements, which is the cash flow statement. Net income from operations, you will notice that it is on the negative side. Now, the reason for that is, from a cash point of view, we paid more out than we received in cash for that same period. This is not accrual, this is cash. Okay? From other sources, there was a positive cash flow of approximately $4.2 million. So it nets out at 1.7 on the negative side. So cash at the beginning of the period, meaning the beginning of December, stood at $101.4 million, but at the end of the period, cash stood at $99.67 million. And you will see that as time goes on during the course of the year, probably go down a bit, again, as a result of single stream replacement that we were asked to do, and that involves the use of cash. Going to what we euphemistically call the clinical services budget. It is entitled Medicaid Budget to Actual through December of 2015. I will simply go through the larger categories. Total Medicaid B stood on positive at just over $500,000. C, a little bit over at $76,000, but considering a $43 million base, that's almost statistically insignificant. Under total Medicaid, significantly under at $796,000, and under for on the Medicaid side as far as the budget is concerned by approximately $1.2 million. Questions about any of those statements? In the interest of time, I will not go through all of the dashboards, I will go through some of them. Looking at page 1 under the dashboard, Medicaid medical expense ratio, this is Medicaid funded services. This has been fairly consistent since the beginning of the year. It stands at 96%. What that essentially means of the Medicaid service dollars that we received, we spent 96 cents of every dollar received, year to date. That's what that stands for. And then you look at the next graph, and you kind of go, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And the reason that it hits the stratosphere is, again, when single stream replacement occurred, and this is a technical issue, literally speaking, in November, and that's when the adjustments or the notification of the adjustments that had to be made were given to us. Essentially, they deobligated all of our state administrative dollars, moved it to single stream replacement, and yet single stream as a total was a net reduction of approximately $14.9 million. And that is a targeted amount that we're meant to replace. Again, my little supposition about use of fund balance dollars, we were asked to replace them, are not a revenue source. Therefore, when you're comparing it to actual state and federal revenue received on the state and federal funded services side, it will be a negative number for the balance of the year. So that's why that chart looks off scale. And it's going to look that way for the entire period. Similar trends can be seen under other local funded services and administrative expenses as well. And again, you will see that for the balance of the fiscal year. Going to the Medicaid current ratio, it currently stands at 2.85. Please keep in mind that this is current assets over current liabilities on the Medicaid side. It's still on the healthy side of things. Under current ratio, all sources, it stands at 3.75. You will, through the course of the year, again, due to the single stream replacement that we're asked to do, see that ratio drop through the course of time. That's inevitable. It's one of those measures that I and staff are keeping tabs on. That being said, I will go all the way to page 7. Under the dashboard, and this is budget versus actual Medicaid services revenue. Now this compares what we budgeted in terms of revenue versus what we have actually received. And this is a nice thing to see when your budgeting, when your actual revenues exceed what you originally budgeted at, and this is a healthy thing to look at. And the difference is approximately a little over $4 million, thereabouts. Going to the Medicaid defense interval, which is on page 8, it currently stands at 91.48. Again, that stands for with the cash available and our obligations on a daily basis, how long will that cash last if we don't get an additional dollar, and it currently stands at 91.48 days. That's what that stands for. Any questions about any of that? And I realize that I went through it quickly. That being said, then I would move to budget revision, and yes, this is budget revision number 4, since we passed the original budget back in June. And I will be addressing the revisions that are stated in column 2. First, looking at other revenue on the top of the first sheet, there's a $50,000 increase in the Wellness Committee revenue. Recall that we have a contract with Coventry as far as health insurance for our employees. A small portion of that, given actual performance, is given to us to provide wellness promotion among employees themselves. So that's the allocation increase for this particular year, and that's a good sign. $23,000 is an increase in COBRA insurance revenue. This is stuff that is collected. These are premiums that are collected from previous employees who are COBRAing. Obviously on both sides, on both the Wellness Committee revenue and as far as COBRA insurance is concerned, there's an offsetting expense associated with each. Going down that particular column, under fund balance appropriated, this is where we take, from a budgetary point of view, funds that are equity in the fund balance and moving them into the operating fund. That comes for the period under this revision, $983,168. Of that, $52,786 covers the ESSOLR contract, and this is for e-learning courses for integrated care initiative that is part of the initiative package we have for the period. $40,000 covers the ADAPT pharmacy contract. Again, this is part of the integrated care initiative. $393,663 of the CMT portal contract, which Christina can talk to you on infinitum about if you want details. $10,568 is for Karen Lukens, and this is again to support the CMT initiative on the portal. $50,000 to cover Sirius contract, that's Sirius, S-I-R-I-U-S, it's a corporation name, in reference to data security initiative, which Robert can talk on infinitum about. $260,175 are covering the Fleischman-Hillard contract, and this has to do with Technology Summit that you had some exposure to in Executive Committee earlier today. $7,800 for the Asheville Event Corporation contract, and this has to do with a technology-enabled care initiative as well. $139,290 is for single, my tongue needs to get in order, replacement of bridge funding for the current period. $22,886 is for the MBN contract, and this has to do with the data center, and we are relocating that off the grounds and leasing space for that. Going down under administrative revenue, $254,000 represents a decrease in single stream administrative funds. It's a subset of what I've talked about in terms of the reallocation that the division had from administrative state-funded dollars into single stream and how we're being asked to backfill that. $514,666 is single stream replacement services. And this is actually an addition that was made for children's and adolescent services with IBD and behavioral health needs. $840,000 increase in state non-UCR funds, and this is a division allocation for TASK, Treatment Alternatives for Safer Communities programs that we received an award for. $73,713 is an increase to federal non-UCR child SA prevention funds, and this is Mission Foundation Fetal Alcohol Prevention Program. $11,700 is for federal non-UCR treatment alternatives for women funding, and this is for 40 substance use disorder training scholarships to attend the MAHEC Women's Recovery Conference. And that pretty much covers the revenue side of the budget revisions. With all revenues, it has to be expenditures. So of that, personnel services comes to $184,000. Supplies, there's no change. Current obligations changed by a modest $9,899. Contracts and grants being the largest single category, and that's a little over $2 million. Again, it is the expenditure portion of the revenue increases that I had previously commented about. So for the period total, the net revisions add $2,000,000 $242,092, revising the current approved budget that was as of December 10th from $389.7 million to $391,904,525. Question?
We need to take any action
Yes.
to do on the budget.
So this would be the committee's recommendation to the board for an actual vote.
Chairman, I'll make a motion that we present it to the full board.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Okay, unanimous, okay. All right, paternal review,
Okay.
your favorite thing.
No. It actually isn't.
Okay.
This is a project that Amanda has led the point on. Please recall that when the state auditor published a recorded audit of our dear colleagues at East Point, there were some concerns raised about the adequacy of controls within all of the LME MCOs. So in addition to the audit, a special internal review assessment was asked for. This was through Clifton Larson. This is the same accounting firm that performed our audit, but it was a different team specifically charged with doing this kind of work, which is a specialty to itself. It is an assessment. This is not an audit per se. So it's more focused and yet it's more comprehensive. They are not making any representation in reference to the financial statements. They're making representation in reference to our processes, the adequacy of controls in our processes, and making some recommendations in terms of changes. So that being said, well, what is the scope of this particular review? It focused on how cash goes out the door. So it focuses on three areas. Accounts, disbursements to providers, disbursements to non-providers, meaning all the vendors that we as an organization deal with, and payroll. If you think about it, that pretty much covers most of the dollars that go out the door. In so doing, they covered made assessments of 80 separate processes that perform all of these things. This is stated on page 3 in reference to the particulars of their particular review. I am not going to read it for you. I do not want to send you to sleep. The executive summary for some would look at this and say, oh, there are 10 things that they cited here. Let me go through what the major item was. As you recognize, being a government organization, there is a culture that reflects accounting practices back to the 1980s, pretty much when I got my CPA, which meant that everything was in paper, that you had backups for everything in paper. I would say to you today, even in conservative institutions like banking, everything in an electronic form is considered to be sufficient. In our contractual environment, that is not the case. So literally speaking, we have paper backups for everything, which means some inefficiencies. It also means that the major finding within this particular review is our inability to refile that paper quickly enough. In response to that, management has hired a contractor. We hope to hire at some point in time permanently, specifically with the charge of all those things that end up being pulled during the course of the day. In this case, since their period of review was October, November, and December, am I correct as far as that's concerned, that we just walked out the door? For those 3 months, we had multiple state audits during that review, so that meant all of that paper had to be pulled. Well, all of that paper pulled had to be refiled. Well, it didn't all happen in a timely kind of fashion. That was their major finding. If that's the worst that they can get, I'll take it. So that ended up being the observation that was on page 5, observation 1. Going to item number 2. Certain documentations associated with confirmation of upload payments to Wells Fargo website is not consistently retained. What are the number of incidents they cited that occurred? 1. I'll take it. With all of the transactions that we do, if only one backup was missed in reference to copying what that transaction that was electronically done, I don't think that's a big grievous error from my point of view. And it's not a control issue since it all can be retrieved electronically from website needed. Observation 3. Lifetime payments amounts per money follows the person. This is a specific program. Tracking spreadsheets maintained in the accounting department does not agree to cumulative payments per this form completed by the Olmsted Group and submitted to the state on NC for reimbursement. This follows the person is probably the program that we deal with cash to consumers on a most extensive kind of basis. Yes, we agree with the findings, and yes, we will address those findings through the course of time. It is a very labor and, again, cash-intensive program. That being said, it is not large. I will not go through the other specific recommendations because, quite frankly, I view them as glitches. In fact, that occurred in one particular finding, a glitch that occurred within Great Plains at that point in time. But I'm certainly open to questions. What I would say is, in their review with the executive leadership, they stated, and I hope I'm paraphrasing this correctly, that although there are recommendations here compared to what they usually see, these are fairly minor. Would that be a good characterization, Christina?
I think so.
Hmm?
Yes.
Is this a review that's done every year?
Oh, no. This is a special kind of review, and I have been in organizations for years and never seen this done.
Okay.
Well, back to what, Fred said when we started it off, the East Point situation.
Okay.
I think I read recently that CFO was criminally charged. We just wanted to make sure that we were doing everything we could to properly review all of our internal controls and make sure everybody had a real good comfort zone on things. And no fancy pickup trucks parked outside that Fred drives or I drive or the maintenance guy drives.
Did you hide your tractor?
I haven't been by his house, but we can check on that.
Let me tell you, Nancy, a tractor is real useful in the city of Chicago.
Not paying contractors, getting cash from the safe of his house, any of those things. So this was a special request that we need to do this.
Great. Do we need a motion to approve this?
Okay.
Oh,
Question back in there. On this report, just for, and it may not be necessary, the management has responded back to each one of these here. Would it be out of line for this thing to be, we just earmark this to come back in 90 days and to see what has been, if we are following the management's recommendation?
Sure.
Because since it does talk about money, since 50% of the items looked at fell under the high priority category. Make sure that we're tracking to make sure that if this report comes out again, Fred and we're going to report it.
So that would be in May.
Just to look at it.
Okay.
May or June, whatever that.
Okay.
But I think everything, from what I read, and it's really a little difficult when you're sick for the first time, about 5 minutes before we talk about it. So just to maybe just follow up to ensure that we are following up the management recommendation.
Yeah, we would use the, what I would propose, we just use the same format, and just
Yes.
add an additional entry right underneath it.
Yes.
That's a good idea.
Just,
I like keeping our feet held to the fire.
it makes it easier sometimes when you got somebody watching over your shoulder,
Right.
top of the hill somewhere.
So do we need to do something to approve the license?
We need to accept it.
Accept the report. Is there a motion to accept the report?
I make it motion.
Is there a second, Nancy?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
So I will not be conducting this review to the board as a whole, but simply ask the chairman to state that an internal assessment had been done and that the finance committee reviewed it in detail, ask for a follow-up report in 90 days. Now, my understanding, Jerry, is that the board resolutions pretty much cover the contents of the revision. Did I state anything that was outside of that?
The resolution that I have addresses the community reinvestment project.
Okay. It should be, I just
Okay.
double check.
It looked good to me, but I wasn't sure what you all were going to talk about, so I have it ready to provide if you need it.
Okay. Is there anything else?
Simply a comment about an ongoing concern, which is kind of tucked within the context of the balance sheet, and that's to talk about the NPI issue. This is in the National Provider Identification Number. One may have remembered that we absorbed or assumed the responsibilities of Western Highlands. Well, something weird occurred, and that is that the department's own accounting program hasn't fully caught up with that yet. So there have been instances in which payments have been made to Western Highlands, those same payments made to Smoky, because we have assumed them. We have attempted to pay them back what we knew was a double payment, and they have applied penalties and interest on what we felt that we owed them. Of what we have paid them, they have actually had instances in which they have, now what's the correct term used? They've underpaid us for what we have already paid. We have a balance, and we've been tracking it with the division. Those penalties and interest and overpayments that have been made now account for $1 million.
Really?
Yes, really.
So what are we
And how that is, how is that represented in the balance sheet is under accounts receivable. So that is what we are owed back in terms of penalties and interest and payments made that have not been recognized. I will always keep the committee informed of the status of this. This first appeared back in May of the last fiscal year and has not yet been resolved. What I have been told is that they have attempted to rearrange their structure as far as the MPIs in the NC track system, and whatever they tried didn't work. So they're trying other interventions. And in the meantime, we are waiting.
Okay. All right, then. Anything else?
Oh, that's more than that.
Brenda, has this correspondence been in writing?
Oh, the whole thing has been in suffocating detail.
Not yet.
Okay. Seeing there's no other business for the finance committee, is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Except to buy lottery tickets, right?
Yeah, nice to meet you, thank you.
Oh, shoot. Careful, that's
I'm here to serve, that's all I do my whole life. That's all I do. I never like to say,
I'll give you 20 minutes.
She stays. Oh, yeah.
Well, I just listened in on first, so I couldn't tell who it was.
I said I'll follow to one meeting.
Okay.
Since the commissioner was coming to this one, I went to another one.
Hi there. So is it just you and I on the number that I gave you? Yes. Okay. This is the number that I I was calling in for the board meeting, actually. Yes, I hear it now. Okay, yeah.
Can y'all hear us?
Yes.
Jill, you ready? Jill, you good to go? Okay, welcome everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. At this time, have the roll call. Nancy Baker.
Here. Let me do this roll call thing and then I'll be ready.
Okay, thank you. Ronnie Bill's not here. We have his proxy, Dr. Jack Kahn, Carolyn Coward, Howard Dove,
Here.
Joyce Edwards. Joyce Edwards, are you on the line, Joyce?
I don't hear them anymore. I don't either. They were just getting ready to the call, but.
Joyce, can you hear us?
Just barely. I can hear you now, but I'm on the line. Maggie's on the line, I think, too.
Okay, okay, Joyce is here. Maggie Faulkner. Maggie Faulkner. Maggie,
Here,
okay.
yeah.
Vicki Green. Myrna Harris. Dr. Jeff Hack. Judy Johansson.
Here.
Billy Kennedy.
Present.
Michael Lavender. Pat McGinnis.
Here.
Morris Pittman. Judy Poe. Mandy Stone. Duncan Sumter.
Here.
Charles Vines.
Here.
All right, I believe we have a quorum. We have a number of proxies. So, okay. Next item of business is public comment. Our first speaker is Mr. Brown. It's you, sir.
What would you like me to send?
Right behind that podium, sir.
Good afternoon, board members. Thank you for giving me some time to speak with you. We are the Brown family. We live in northwest Buncombe County. Myself, Tim, my wife Carol, and then Alex, who's 22. We're summer arrival of this last year to Buncombe County, coming down from Michigan. The message I want to give today is essentially I want to share with you some of the challenges we've had, and therefore perhaps some opportunities to improve the level of services that we see are available and being provided to us. I want to do that in sharing some of our experiences to date with attempts to get services for Alex, for community living support services. Our perspective, we are a family with an individual that has IDD. We're new to North Carolina, but we have 26 years of experience in receiving services for our children. The last 4 years have been involved with getting community living supports for Alex. Our North Carolina experience is, the first month down, July, we immediately contacted Smokey. Alex was put on the Innovations waiver waiting list. Through one of the provider services, Alex's assessment was completed. And one of the best news, Alex, within that first month, had a 24-hour per week job at Ingalls working in a deli. Okay? That came with 3 weeks of job coaching, which now he isn't required to have, and he's doing just fine, and he's very happy with it. Our second month in North Carolina, Alex's background information and our draft goals for submittal to the providing agency were put together. The third month, our providing agency submitted those goals to Smokey. In the fourth month, Smokey approved a modest amount, 7 hours a week of community living supports. Point here is, 4 months have passed, and we finally got approval for services. Month 5, Alex, by this time, has received a total of 3 hours of community living support service. That was conducted by our daughter, who's the only staff we've been able to find. That's continued on to the 6th month. No staffing. We approached another service provider, signed up with them. Same story. No staffing available for them. Month 7, here we are. Unable to receive staffing services from either of our providers. We're now contacting, working with the ARC as a third provider to see if we can get staffing. Well, let me give you a little perspective, a comparative perspective of what we experienced in Michigan. In July of 2012, we approached our Department of Health Services in Michigan, had our intake papers completed, and immediately Alex received a SIS evaluation. In 2 weeks, the SIS evaluation report came back, was completed. We were offered a HAB waiver and a choice voucher. In 2 months, we had a case manager working with us to develop goals and to initiate services. Within 2 years, Alex was hiring his own staff. He was using a fiscal intermediary to handle payroll, and he continued to have services from the case manager. Now, no, Michigan is an economically depressed state. Alex's HAB waiver was offered before Medicaid expansion. Now, a couple key points on that comparative. A lot of time, it seems, the North Carolina system is being spent on tying up with intakes and approval process resources that should be utilized and redirected to paying funding for staffing. North Carolina state money is used, I think, in excess to operate administrative agencies. To me, that's code word for control.
Yep.
And leaving less money to slowly trickle down to people who are intended to be the ones receiving the personal services. Control measures on how funds are spent for personal services are essentially eliminating access to these services. We're a case in point. At $9 an hour that Alex has to hire staff, we can't get staff. We need to allow more flexibility in how recipients' state funding assistance can be utilized. We don't like to be tied to mandated rates or mandated amounts. Let us, give us the funding amount we will use best to serve Alex's needs. Now, my point is, North Carolina doesn't have to appropriate funds to the level that Michigan does. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting, North Carolina should select best practices from other states in order to improve the efficiency for use of North Carolina funds. Particular suggestions, Smokey could collaborate with providers in order to help the staffing shortage. Smokey and providers could collaborate with perhaps the community colleges, AB Tech, to help train staff in order to improve the numbers that are available. thank you, and we're willing and able to talk to any of the board members at a later date. If you have more suggestions, and we'd be glad to get involved. We've been involved, like I say, for 26 years, and we'll be around for at least that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mary Short?
Hello.
Hello. So, Mary Short, and you all know Katie. We're from Alexander County. So, the last time I spoke to the board was at the December 10th meeting. And so I want to give you a couple of updates from that time. I told you, I introduced myself then at the December 10th meeting. Hi, Mary Short from Alexander County. I'm out on bail for felony neglect of an adult disabled person with serious injury. So I thought you all might want to know that those charges were dismissed. And there was actually no evidence ever presented. I wonder what that's going to mean going forward. But anyway, also at that meeting, I said what I really came to talk to you about was the backup staffing report. And I pointed out to you that in your December 10th board packet, there was this fabulous little chart about backup staffing, but it had this funny little paragraph over here that said that of this grand total, 42% of backup staffing not being provided was due to the consumer or guardian declining the service of the replacement staff person. And I told you that 42% couldn't possibly be correct because there was, out of the total 8,900, only 2,600 were, and I said, but we'll give that, whoever did this report, the presumption of innocence that they just did the numbers wrong. So guess what? Lo and behold, at today's meeting, they didn't hand out the same documents from the December 10th meeting that never happened. They have new documents, and the new little chart, guess what it says? Staff was declined 23% of the time. I guess that presumption of innocence for that 42% they tried to sell you turned out to be, they just made a mistake. It's really 23%. So, I also, though, in this new set, in the old set, it talked about the most commonly missed services, and it lists on here in-home skill building guru. And for October of 15, it says 29 incidents were reported. But in the new information handed out today, for February 2015, it's not included as one of the top 5. I guess we're back to that innocence thing again. So then we get to the complaints and grievances on Medicaid. And there's this little chart about how many complaints and grievances were filed every month. So I thought, because I've been sort of accused of being the only IDD individual filing complaints and grievances, and that was making the numbers all wrong, so I thought you all might want to really look at this little chart. It's in your packet. And for January of 2016, there were 36 complaints and grievances, not one of them mine. There were 26 in December. In fact, I haven't filed a grievance since November when the number was 29. And now in January it's 36. Not me, people. The next thing I want to talk to you about is, Katie and I go up to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee meetings, and in case you missed it, there was a great article on North Carolina Health News by Rose Hoban, and she captured what happened and the discussion about the LME MCOs having $840 million in their fund balance that they weren't spending on services. It's a really great article. Now remember, the LME MCOs, the 8 of them had $840 million they were sitting on, you all are sitting on, but the state in its bank account had $400 million. So yeah, anyway. But I also wanted to talk to you about NPR radio. There was a great program on this morning called on Morning Edition. You can go to the NPR website and listen to it. Nursing home evictions strand the disabled in costly hospitals. And when you listen to this, what I want you to hear though, is instead of this nursing home, think of it as in terms of enrolled Medicaid provider agency. Because the interesting correlation is, with a 30-day notice, an enrolled Medicaid provider agency can discharge Katie from her services. And there's nothing we can do to stop that. They're entitled to do that. There's no ombudsman for us. We're just stuck with it. And finally, just to get back to my favorite subject of relative as direct service employee, I'd like you to all to sort of think about the concept that the law that you do support, you support the law that says you cannot force people who are mentally ill, you cannot force those individuals to take their medication. And you, LME MCOs, not you individual people, but the LME MCOs support that law. We're not forcing the mentally ill people to take their medications. Yet, with Katie and her choice to choose her relative as her direct support employee, you are not respecting Katie's right to choose who touches her naked body. I think you all need to get your priorities straight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. Jerry Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good to see y'all. Hope you had as much fun as I did since you last saw me. If you didn't, we're gonna have to talk about that. There's a big buzzword out here in Buncombe County, and I think there's a lot of hype to it that is probably unnecessary in some ways. And the buzzword, those three words, is called domestic violence program. And if you go to Maryland website, you'll find that it's not a new thing. It's really big in Maryland, talking about domestic violence. But it's also related to adults. And since we have the highest population of veterans, upward of 20,000 here in western North Carolina, they are probably one of the biggest targets for domestic violence, other than women themselves. But my concern is that our counties, and I'm going to say our counties, all 23 that we are here in this Smoky Mountain, we're all affected by domestic violence. But my concern is the county is picking up the tab for a lot of domestic violence, which is mental health. It really goes to the heart of mental health. And why Smoky is not really engaged in this at some point in time of putting this on the front burner, I don't know. Now, if the counties are doing things with other providers that are not probably in your network, and they are spending county dollars for domestic violence and it's strictly related to mental health, then I'd like to know why there's not a MOA, Memorandum of Understanding, or memo, whatever you want to call it. Why there's not something that would connect our counties to the LME, because the domestic violence program that Buncombe County is fixing to throw out into their big arena in August is going to have about 9 agencies under one roof. And all these agencies are going to be processing domestic violence situation with adults and children, not just adults. So my concern is my $595,000 that your CEO heard me talk to the county commissioners in Buncombe about. I want that money to go to the real needs that we are talking about within the LME that we know exist at our hospital right here in Buncombe, and jails and other things that presents a hard fact right now. And I don't like pumping millions of dollars into a program in Buncombe County when we already have an existing agency here. And I'd like to know if there's some way this can be coordinated together to figure out if they're actually serving people that should be Medicaid recipients under your umbrella. The counties need to save money and let the state do their job of Medicaid. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. All right, our next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Does anyone have a chance to look at the agenda for tonight's meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Nancy second, I think you second. I will close the second. Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? So,
Accept the minutes as presented.
all right, there's a motion, is there a second?
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes from our last meeting, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. All right, our next item on the agenda, conflict of interest disclosure. Tracy Hayes, General Counsel.
This is the time of the board meeting where any board member who has a new actual or potential conflict of interest should disclose that. Hearing none, we can move on.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the Consumer and Family Advisory Committee report. I'd like to call on Pat McGinnis.
Thank you. Our CPAC steering committee, we met on February the 8th. We heard a presentation from Christina Carter concerning the Smoky strategic plan for the future. We followed it with questions and answers. Our steering committee also reviewed financial documents, including Smoky's balance sheet and the CPAC expenditure report. We're in continued planning for the statewide collaborative CPAC meeting, which will be held on April the 22nd at the Sheraton here in Asheville. Keynote speakers that have already been identified are Brian Ingram and Dr. Jeff Heck. The focus of the keynotes will be integrated care and the future of behavioral health services in North Carolina. We've also sent out some other invitations and awaiting some responses and may have to make some adjustments for some other speakers, but we're still in the planning phase. And invitations for the meeting and details will be shared when the final details are arranged, which we hope to do at our next steering committee meeting. But in the meantime, our local meetings will be, Western will meet on March the 8th, Central the 14th, Northern the 15th, and the Western Highlands Legacy Group will meet on the 21st. And during the March local meetings, we will hear a presentation on the Community Reinvestment Project given by Smoky Provider Network staff. Agendas will also include further planning on this statewide collaborative meeting we're having, and a review of the registration materials and finalization of the day's agenda. And our steering committee should finalize all that hopefully on April the 8th. So we're looking forward to that, and hope we have lots of people from throughout the state at our meeting, and some of the board members too. Kind of can.
Thank you, Pat. Our next item is Duncan Sumter's going to give us Provider Advisory Council report. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My report will be short and sweet today. The council met on February 17th. Our primary goals right now revolve around integrated care and wellness. There was a lot of discussion around the innovations waiver and when that's going to roll out and how that's going to roll out. I want to compliment Jesse Smathers with Smoky Mountain Center. He did a wonderful job of fielding a lot of questions, researching those quickly and answering them. The piece the council is doing over this next month is Eric Christensen with CCNC presented data around risk factors and wellness per county, and so each regional collaborative is going to look at those factors by population in their counties and catchment and determine an action plan of how the communities can work together to promote wellness. So that's going to be our integrated care project. Our next meeting is March the 16th, and anybody that would like to come is more than welcome.
Thank you. All right, our next report. Next item on the agenda is Bill Kennedy, who's going to give us a performance and quality committee report. Bill?
Well, we missed last month's meeting, and we're back on track. There are quite a few things that are going on. We're basically, most of our programs are doing well. There were new measures established in January 2016, and we're taking care of quality improvement in those measures. The level 2 incidents trending down, most things trending down. There's a few things trending up. We keep looking at numbers, it's pretty tricky. And then as the numbers are changed, we review those numbers in back. That as more data becomes available, we correct the numbers. And so they don't always appear the same 6 months ago as they do now. We're correcting them now as we do that. But Medicaid eligibles has dropped since January 15. The Medicaid penetration rate has declined, and we think that's due to 30,000 extra uninsured consumers that have come into our catchment area. So that's kind of an anomaly in our data. There have been 12 months have shown a decrease in percent of authorizations for both clinical and administrative, and care managers now review the full array of services. Transportation continues to be a problem with getting people to come to their follow-up appointments, and we're working hard on that. Our staff is also looking at schedules, and they schedule those appointments a week out. They have to be done within 14 days. So we're trying different ways to try to get those people to do their follow-up appointments. Those consumers, excuse my language. The staff is a problem, finding respite staff and backup support staff. The reimbursement rates are set unrealistically low, as I understand it, and it's hard to find people for $9, $8 to $9 an hour that are going to do a good job. And you get a lot of turnover with that. So until we can find more money to make that a living wage, we're concerned about how we can improve that with the money. So it gets back to me, and we talked about it, that once again, we need more money in mental health in North Carolina. And so we are looking good. I'm glad to be part of this quality agreement. We've got Jack Kahn on there, and Dr. Jack Kahn, and he's a great resource, having been in the field for his whole life, I guess. And so we continue to keep analyzing these numbers and trying to do better. And but we feel Smokey's on the right track. So.
Thank you. Okay, County Commissioner Advisory Board report. Vicki Green is not here tonight. Is anybody going to give that?
I'm doing that for her.
All right.
This is a fun one. She's been doing these. They've been going around doing the presentations to the county communities. This is the County Commissioner Advisory Board and community meetings. They've done most of the counties. Watauga will be on Monday, so I haven't been to one of these meetings. I did listen in. I wasn't here, but I was on the phone for this whole meeting. We're getting really good feedback from all the counties about this involvement. It's also bringing all the stakeholders in each county together, which in a lot of these counties had not networked together to find out what resources are there. So Smokey's playing an important part about that. Brian did a presentation on the About Us, the Medicaid reform, and then the description of integrated care philosophy, and they seem to like that, and it's a good program. Just wanted to say that we've gotten very positive comments from all the counties. They really think this is a great program, and I think this networking part will help all of us. The key findings so far is that the data was well received, and counties looking forward to quarterly reports. Very positive feedback, as I said, validation of the positive relationships between care coordination and PHC staff, validation of the knowledge, use, and need for community-based training, and demonstrated the strong relationships between county agency staff and Smoky community-based staff. It was a great opportunity to identify county concerns. Excellent connections are being made between sheriffs and law enforcement agencies, and I hope the hospitals are included in this too. Great opportunity to discuss stigma, recovery, and peer support, and it's a great opportunity for Smokey to define its role in community issues. Also been able to help CCAB members and participants better understand community treatment and support resources. So it is, and the goal is to have crisis service focus within each community's partnership with mobile crisis management, walk-in centers, law enforcement, hospital EDs, and magistrates all on the same page to divert IVCs to ED and ED use when appropriate. So our emergency room visits were up this month on our quality and performance, but it's been trending down, so we're just going to stay on that, and that's one of the goals, is to keep people out of those emergency rooms. And so thank you, but this is exciting, and I look forward to being there with it on Monday.
Thank you. Our next item is the Bylaws Committee report. Tracy Hayes, our General Counsel, and Jay Coward.
The Bylaws Committee met earlier today. The Bylaws Committee consists of Maggie Faulkner, Joyce Edwards, and Carolyn Coward. Maggie Faulkner participated by phone. Carolyn Coward had given her proxy. We spoke with her last night. And Joyce Edwards was unable to participate. The committee considered recommended changes to the bylaws that were presented by Jay and myself. And the committee recommends that the full board take into consideration whether or not to approve these recommended changes to the bylaws. I can go through them. I won't spend a lot of detail on every single change. Some of the changes are simply to make sure that we are making sure the bylaws match to our current practice. We also included a new Article 10 that outlines indemnification provisions. There shouldn't be anything objectionable in that. It's simply making clear that Smokey will provide indemnification and defense if there's any liability claim made against an officer or director of the LME MCO. You have the option under the current bylaws of considering these for 30 days or deciding to vote on them today. So it's really at the pleasure of the board.
All right. Are there any questions, or does anyone wish to make a motion on the bylaws, or do you want more time to study them and review the bylaws?
I'm just looking at them, so it's a lot to look over. I don't doubt that Tracy and Jay did a great job, but I need to look at this before I move on it. And I'll take it home and read it this every month, and be glad to be more informed when we approve it next month, unless you think there's something in here that will affect our operating in the next month that we need to change immediately.
There is one item that we would ask that you change immediately, but we'll address that at a later point in the agenda, if that's all right.
And perhaps you could call me. I've been reading over some of these, and I may have some questions before we vote.
If any board member has any questions, you're free to call me or Jay. We're more than happy to explain any of the changes we are recommending.
So we'll place those on the March agenda, okay? We don't need a motion to do that, okay? The next item on the agenda is board membership announcement, and at this time it's with really just, I hate to inform you of this, we found out Charles Lyons is going to be stepping down from the board. Charles has been just a great member of our board. He was chair of Western Highlands Board, and just Charles is going to be missed. We talked to Charles earlier at our finance meeting. Charles is county manager of Mitchell County, and had a lot on his plate. Charles, we're going to miss you. And I don't know if there's something you'd like to say at this time.
Not a lot, other than the fact that it's been my privilege and honor to serve on the mental health boards in Western North Carolina since 2006, starting with Western Highlands and moving to Smoky. It's just been my pleasure, my honor, and just to be able to support those who need the services that we provide, and try to do everything that we can for them.
Well, we're not gonna let you off that.
Yeah.
You take your kid.
It would have been fine.
Do you want me to hug him forever?
I'll come and get him up here.
Charles.
Now, I can remember meeting Charles and Chuck, as he informed me early on that he wanted to be called under, not the easiest of circumstances, having to do with the closeout of Western Highlands.
Quite a task.
Quite a task, and I'm guessing that when you signed up for that job, you had no idea what you're getting into, did you?
Well, I thought maybe when I retired as county manager and that part of the years that I served there went away, that I'd leave in peace, but there wasn't a lot of peace back in those days. But it was a task well worth, and I think what has been done in the consolidation of Smoky and Western and the number of counties that we have, it is for the better. It really is for the better.
Well,
And I appreciate every person sitting here for what you give, because, sometimes there's, like Mr. Kennedy over here, there's lots of boards that we serve on throughout the state, throughout the county, and it takes a lot. And this is one that I took very, very seriously above all the other boards that I serve on.
Well, it was, you were a great guy to work with, and I know I could call you at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and you could do the same, and, we took care of a lot of, very challenging business, and I couldn't have asked for a better board chair at the time. I actually had 2 board chairs there for a while, so, very happy to have gotten to know you, and appreciate your difficult decision to step down, but just in some consideration of that, we do have a couple of things here. Let me read this. It says Smoky Mountain LME MCO presented to Charles Vines. The Smoky Mountain LME MCO Board of Directors expresses its deepest appreciation and gratitude for your board member service. Your paramount leadership, dedication, and uncommon wisdom have set the standard for commitment to our community. You have our heartfelt thanks. Cake or what it is, but I might want to open that up and see. I can't hear it.
Yeah. Neil made that too. She took all the dinner and. So. Was taken.
Still.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you very, very much.
Even from Rick and I. Okay?
I won't be to work for them next time. Thank y'all so
You know
very much.
my,
Thank y'all so very much.
Thank you,
I
Charles.
will miss all of you.
Don't forget us.
I won't, I promise.
We won't let you forget us.
That's exactly right.
Thank you.
We have 2 more items under this area, and I'd like to call on our attorney, Jake Howard, please.
Okay, first thing I need to do is to go back in time to the agenda, because there is one thing that we do need to adopt that Tracy was going to tell you about, but I waved her off at the last minute, so we got Chuck announced first. But since Chuck is stepping down, and he was prepared to be the next chair, Rick French is going to continue to be the chair, and we need to elect a new vice chair to replace an open seat. And in the meantime, we need to amend our bylaws because it puts us in a rather odd situation. If you will turn to Article 5 in the bylaws and look at A under officers, And you'll see struck through, no chair or vice chair shall serve more than 2 consecutive terms of office. The nominating committee thinks that since Rick has graciously agreed to serve as another term as the chair, so we don't violate our own bylaws, we amend that one part of the bylaws this evening so that we can allow Rick to continue to serve, and then we need to think about someone, we're hoping that someone will volunteer to be vice chair unless we reach out and ding them before. So I would put that back to the chair now, the presiding chair, to suggest that a motion be made and this will be adopted.
Okay, first, are there any questions of Jay? Being none, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
All right, there's a motion, is there a second?
Second.
And a second, is there any more discussion?
So are we talking about just adopting Article 5, Paragraph A?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
And I believe you were the one that asked, is there anything we need to do to move forward? If there is, this is it.
Okay.
Asking you shall receive.
be careful what you wish for, it might come true.
All right, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Opposed? All right.
All right.
I feel like we need a glutton for punishment award for Rick here. Thank you.
Well, you are very welcome.
We also wanted to bring to the attention that the current membership of our committees is, there are several open spots, and because of the addition of Dr. Jack Kahn to the Performance and Quality Committee, we have a rather fulsome committee there, and we have 2 openings in the Finance Committee, and we think that we probably could persuade Michael Lavender to move over from the Performance and Quality Committee to the Finance Committee. We have not asked him to do that, but we think he probably has that same servant attitude as everybody else does. We still need a few more positions, and I've brought those to the attention of Rick and Brian, and they're going to do some thinking about it, and probably next time around we'll have some names that we can bring up to fill in other positions. That'll probably also involve talking to some of you to see about your willingness to be appointed to those positions. That's all I have to report.
Okay.
Okay, you can keep, well, I just want to stop.
Okay. Whatever they said. Okay.
If the chair would indulge a slight change to the agenda here, to make a little more sense, if we were able to introduce Mr. Jones before we have the closed session, that would kind of free people up and let things happen a little more efficiently. Okay. Well, I'm sure everyone recalls that Nancy Ford left us for a position with the university out there in Cullowhee, and certainly enjoys a much shorter ride to work than she's been having for some time. And we set out on a national search for a new HR director. It takes me back to original conversations I had, when I was hired, and all during the phase of talking about the waiver and Smokey and how would we do what we were going to do. And I always said, in my top 3, it's always personnel. Our ability to retain and recruit is going to be a major limiting factor for us because of the sophistication that had to germinate and grow within the organization, and really the type of talent we would have to attract. So, with Jim coming to us, there's 2 parts to this story. Number one, we must be doing a pretty good job with that to have gotten a guy of his caliber who has really an international set of experiences that you can read about, and he'll talk a little about. And also, we're very much looking for someone like Jim that could kind of help us in that whole progression that we need to make again around talent, retention and attraction, and developing what we have. Once again, I feel like we're ready to go through another sort of iteration with the organization in terms of the level of professionalism and just kind of where we have to get to, and that's not easy. But he's the guy for the job. So, Jim, we welcome you, and the chance for the board to see you and offer some comments or thoughts or anything that you folks would like to address with Jim. I'll turn it over to you first.
Greetings. I look forward to the opportunity to work with your organization. This is my leadership team for the Human Resource Department. They're here with me, and they've been great in helping me transition in. I'm looking forward to the challenge and to great things happening. And as I said during my interview process, I'm actually looking forward to all the great things that I see in store for Smokey. And so this is actually good for me, more than for you. So anything I can do to help with the board. I met your attorney, your counsel yesterday, and we've talked about the things that we, Human Resources, need to do for you. We're at your service, our entire team. Thank you.
Just, I don't know if you've been living here before, but welcome to the mountains.
Thank you.
And it's great to have you, and this is a great organization that is always in transition as long as I've been involved in it. So creative solutions are the key here, so I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
Let's give Jim a round of applause.
I did explain to him the requirement that you select a college basketball team, and you have 60 days.
And they're blue, light blue, light blue, light blue, light blue.
We'll give him another month for that.
Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
All righty. At this time, we need to have a closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318, 11A1, in order to prevent disclosure of competitive health care information that is privileged or confidential to North Carolina General Statute 122C through 126.1, are not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes, and to consult with the attorneys pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143 through 318.11A3. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, Jerry, you ready to go? Thank you, okay. Okay. All right, Brian, come over.
Okay, I'm going to save most of my comments for the last agenda item, but I can tell you that we're on pace with our rebranding effort, and certainly look forward to that. Legislative update. Yeah, there was an LOC meeting. I'll be able to fill you in on a lot of what unfortunately wasn't discussed in relationship to that around LME MCOs and fund balance in relationship to the Community and Capital Reinvestment Plan. And although it's not a legislative update per se, they end up in legislation. There's a meeting on the 17th of March that the Secretary has invited all the LME MCO CEOs to come to, that will be to discuss his plans or the department's plans for further consolidation. Which certainly makes sense because we've we've talked about this before, there's a couple of things that need to come together here. That being the designation of the health regions, that will be part of the whole bidding process for contracts to operate a managed care plan for Medicaid health care benefits and payments. And a lot of discussion around how those regions should have some alignment with the LME MCO region. Now, that won't be perfect, to say the least, but there's been a lot of question about what those things are going to look like, and obviously they need to coincide to some degree. Secretary, in relationship to the request from Cardinal and Centerpoint to approve the merger of those two LMEs, MCOs, deferred, saying that more time was needed to look at those very issues that I described. That whatever was going to happen with the LME MCOs needed to happen underneath the umbrella of Medicaid reform. So the time for those parts of the pieces of the puzzle to be put in place is pretty close. I would suspect within the next month or so, consistent with the release of the report the department has to make to the oversight committee. All of these things are going to have to come together, or they certainly should come together. So we'll keep you posted on that. You have in your packets this community and capital reinvestment plan. Much of the information that is in here has to do with previous discussions and commitments the board has made around our interest in doing just what the title suggests, reinvest back into the community in terms of services and facilities for our members. We worked very hard in creating a somewhat expanded version of this because of the, I will say, lack of information that's been presented around this, and in some cases misinformation. And for some, you could say to some degree, many of the folks that were involved with the original architecture and political lifting around the waiver are not around anymore, or perhaps they're not big players. So if you'll note in the first paragraph, we talk about the original agreement associated with, in fact, CMS approving the waiver, is the notion that Medicaid savings, of course, are going to accrue, okay? And I get maybe that's square one. If you're going to run a business like this, you're either going to go out of business because you spend too much money, okay? Or you're going to create some savings from proper management and care management. So it is inevitable that there is going to be some amount of savings associated with that Medicaid plan. So the original agreement was that those savings would be used to reinvest. And a lot of good reasons for that. And if you go into the thinking, and again, we've talked about this before, the state chose a very particular plan in terms of a public option rather than a commercial option. Those savings that would be part of a commercial plan would be paid out in dividends and profits. And before you think too negatively about that, go and look at your holdings in your 401k, right? That's the profit that's accrued there lets the economy run and allows for all kinds of good things to happen. North Carolina chose a different path. Our reinvestments are public, they're visible, and we make a commitment to reinvest those. So that was a big plus when North Carolina was originally negotiating with CMS around a somewhat unusual procurement process. And in many cases looked like a government-to-government type of transaction. But given that it was competitive in nature and it had reinvestment as part of that, well, we wouldn't be here if that argument wasn't won. So we're very, it's very important that we point out that original agreement, and of course, the question now is that if that was the intention in the agreement, it would seem that the action of the General Assembly in the budget bill to require, well, first off, to reduce single stream funding by $110 million this year and 150-some million next year, certainly is not consistent with that original, I'm going to use the word promise, because that's how people refer to it. So the fact that we're required to backfill that, and, let's be very clear, nothing is any different as a result of that. We've backfilled, there's no changes in eligibility, there's no changes in service. It's the same plan and activities we have in place around managing that amount of money. There's a net loss to the system, right? I mean, you understand the math. There's that much money being taken out of the system that is, and the whole point of this is that that money is not being used for services related to mental illness, substance use, and IDD, period. That's the rub. And you can decide whatever you want about it, but it is very important that in all the discussion and the big headlines and sound bites that people understand that. Now, in that original agreement, was there anything in our contract that said you must? And the methodology for doing so in terms of reinvestment is thus and such. No, there is not. There's no rules around that anywhere. Okay? Our judgment was that we would do that as soon as we were able. Each LME MCO can tell their own story about the pace in which they felt comfortable in making those reinvestments. I can only tell ours, and ours is unique. We went on the waiver in a fairly early phase, and within, I guess we put 8 months, 10 months, however you'd like to talk about it, it was really about 6 months in, we started having, with Chuck and Mandy and others, very serious conversations about what role we could play in terms of stabilization and eventual merger of Western Highlands. I don't think that would have been a good time for us to go about a massive reinvestment project, because we had to put everything we had into managing an enormous consolidation and stabilization of a $150 million Medicaid contract. So somewhere along that phase, and I've told this story several times, I'll keep telling it, I remember going to a meeting over at, I think it was Mission Health, with representatives from the county and the hospital and the community at large, talking about the terrible problems that people were experiencing in the emergency department, and just the inability to make changes in the system, especially in this area around crisis services, and what a gridlock was in place. And it became really obvious, we were about 10 minutes through the meeting, that what we needed to do is to move out of the building we were in and turn it into a treatment facility. And I said, okay, I got it. You're going to have to give us 6 months or so to do this, because we really have a lot of work to do, and 100% of the effort has to go into stabilizing that infrastructure. And that's just what happened. And that became our very first reinvestment project that we're very proud of, and continues now. We had the great benefit of receiving funding from the state, as well as Buncombe County and Mission Health for that. And then, we've begun other things. And really, this is a laundry list of all of those activities that are planned for both this year and next year in the most descriptive way that we could go about it. Now, as part of that single stream reduction this year, we will be making it's really just moving money around. We will be putting $14 million into that vacant hole of single stream funding to make up for that cut. Next year, it's on the order of $21 million. if it stays at that same level. And there's a lot of question about whether or not it should. You know, is this fair, let's say, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. You hear the sound bites about how the LME MCOs have these enormous amounts of money, but there's a little bit more to that story, again, that's conveniently left out when those stories are being reported. But at any rate, you know, we're very solid on this part of it. The next part that we look at, well, we didn't number these pages, which would have been helpful. And certainly I'd be happy to answer any questions about any of these that you might have when you look at it. But if you look at the funding unavailable for reinvestment, restricted for special purposes, well, these special purposes aren't things that Fred's made up or Brian's come up with to just like put money away. These are required holdings that we have that are, as I like to say, baked in. So 60% of the money that we have, and probably an even larger portion of that, whatever number it is statewide, we have no control over other than to say that it's there, contractually obligated, or part of some requirement for accounting purposes. And again, for whatever reason, that wasn't included in the grand articles and sound bites that you heard. What we hope to be able to do is to continue this reinvestment effort into the next fiscal year. Our ability to do that depends on our ability to predict the future. And I think you have all, now been here long enough to understand that we are in a very, very dynamic industry. We receive a capitation check every month based on how many people are eligible for Medicaid. We work very hard to predict that. We have authorizations that are in place that we don't know are going to be used or not. We do a calculation called incurred but not reported to try to model forward for months how much money we are going to be paying out. I think it is fair to say that that is a pretty dynamic environment that, this business is in just by its nature. We are also in the food chain. We inherit whatever happens in Raw. Okay? None of us here in this room write the legislation or vote on it, but we are required to operationalize it. So for example, this year we're required to operationalize a contribution of $14 million. And if nothing changes next year, we will be operationalizing a requirement to move $21 million. Okay? There is a chance that it won't happen like that. There's a lot of discussion about this. Of course, the commercial insurance companies are fueling the stories that you read about in the newspaper. They would love to see us look a certain way. They would love to see more money taken out of us that would help in the startup of healthcare transformation. It's just the way it is, okay? But what's important is that you understand the whole story, and you understand the commitment that we are making to reinvestment in the amounts and the types of services that we believe are important. There was a caveat in the budget bill that talked about the Medicaid rebates, which I'm not going to even begin to try to explain to you because all I can do is kind of repeat some of the words. But there was an expectation that there would be actually excess revenue in relationship to how that was calculated. And there was an allowance, I think it specified the $30 million. Did it specify the amount, or was it silent about that? I think it said 30 million. Up to 30 million could be put in from that Medicaid rebase to reduce the 150 million down to net 120 million. Will that happen? I don't know. Are people angry about these reductions? Yes, they are. Some are taking different positions based on where they sit. My job is for you to understand the whole story. I can explain it for Smoky, and to a certain degree, I can talk about it statewide. So, what we did was, write the best document we could that explains sort of the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say, and then give you a very good picture of the additional projects that we would like to fund going forward. Where all of this ends up, for this year, we're solid. For next year, and again, the paragraph that the couple paragraphs we wrote here, assuming our fund balance projections remain stable, we plan to remain deeply engaged with our communities about reinvestment, meeting with representatives. A number of factors outside our control will affect the viability of these projects. Factors such as development time, annual negotiation around capitation rates. We just had the meeting this week. So do we know how much money we're going to be paid next year? No, we do not. And again, that's just the way it is. Potential funding cuts. We could have another one. Increased business operation costs, legislative public policy changes and future mergers. You heard me talk about that. It cost us probably $5 million to merge with Western Highlands. These aren't the types of things that are reported in the media, but again, these are the things that are important for you to understand. You take all of those factors and we try to use good judgment. So while we talk about these additional projects that we would like to expand, we'll have to kind of wait and see and edge our way along. And I think the way the resolution was worded, it kind of takes it as a year chunk, so that as we come upon this next year, we can kind of look and see where we are. Now, because this is not involving state funds, or there might be 50 cents in there by the time we get done, I don't know, not much. We aren't required to get permission from anyone to do it. But just the very nature of what we're doing and the scope of it, my first request is that we would do this as part of a board action. In the past, we've done board action because we were moving state funds, and the state actually had to approve us doing that. So we would have to send them the board minutes and the resolution, and they'd say, okay, you can go and do that. Because this is not state money we're talking about here. It's really at our discretion about how we should use it. Ironically, there is a correspondence from CMS that says exactly that. So there could even be a legal challenge about the authority of the General Assembly to direct the use of Medicaid funds for purposes other than what they were intended. So, I think I got it all out there. Any questions?
Rob, where do we rank as an MCO around the amount of money we're reinvesting with the other MCOs? And that might not be a fair question, you might not know, but do you have a general sense if, 50% are doing this type of stuff, or?
You're right, it isn't an easy question to answer.
So, don't.
There's a difference between having plans and, writing checks. And these things, in all fairness, how long has it taken us to do, the Caldwell and McDowell things? 5 years. 5 years to do that. And it wasn't because people weren't working at it. You only, the C3 at 356, that's been ballistic. And because so much cash was infused into that, that's $6 million. That kind of money gets committed to something, it lets you go much more quickly. We had the facility, a lot of things really came into place to make that go as quickly as it has, and it still has been, there's more to go, but that's an anomaly, the pace that's gone at. So, I will say, and I think it is fair to say, that not everyone is the same with this. And that presents challenges. Because not everyone's plans are as extensive, I guess. They may not be as thorough, as committed, and the last thing I'm going to do is throw somebody under the bus with this. I know what we want to do. And the most important thing I do is to make sure all of you understand that, along with the rest of the story, so that when you read the articles, you can say, yeah, but what you didn't say is this, this, and that, and here's what we're doing in smoking.
Brian, do you foresee in the future, because I see in here this group home bridge funding, do you foresee that the IDB group homes will eventually go away? Do you think they're really gonna be here long-term?
Yeah, that was kind of a bad outcome with this personal care services, right?
It was, this was at a time, even before the waiver we're in now, we were in another way, the cap waiver, and as we were moving into innovations, there were some people living in certain situations that some of that residential funding didn't match. So the state came in, we went out, met individually with all those individuals, gave them a choice to stay there or not, met with the guardian, or whoever helps the person make decisions in their life, and they made a decision to keep certain people in certain places. And so it was told even from the very beginning, Nancy, that this funding would not last and we would probably not be able to sustain it. So the state paid for it a couple of years, and then this year what we see in this budget was they did not choose to pay for it, so they chose for us to pay for it. So.
Or it was an option for us to pay for, I guess is how I would put it.
Yeah.
And the state, in all, I think, clarity here, was supposed to have developed a plan to continue funding that, which they neglected to do. And they will acknowledge that.
But like the group home that Sherry's in, that's
It's
there.
not about, there's nothing about this that is intended to no longer provide that service. It's just that the financing for the residential placement was inadequate, so when this service got backed out, there wasn't enough money to do it.
It was for a very special category of people.
Okay.
Good? All right, no, we're great, Nancy, come on.
Yes, we are. I say it every day and wherever I go.
I know.
It's the longer term you're looking at, and that's what a lot of people do. So I like your long-term view.
Okay, good. Hope we stay in the long-term game.
I'm not done yet.
Okay, our next item on the agenda is report of the Finance Committee. I'll turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer.
I learned a long time ago, being last is never a good place to be on the agenda, but I'll do my best to answer everybody's occasion. The financials to be reviewed are as of December 31st, so it's the first half of the fiscal year. So under the assets part of the balance sheet, cash, checking, and interest stands at $85.4 million. Cash as far as the risk fund reserve, Medicaid risk fund reserve, is at 21.7. The investment in the North Carolina Capital Trust is at 14.3. So total assets as of December 31st are at 137 million. Under the liability section, the accounts payable are at 9.2, and the IBNR on the Medicaid side is 19.6. Total liabilities then for the period as of December 31st stands at 29.8 million. I won't go through the details of the fund balance, but I will go through some items within it. Under unassigned current year Medicaid stands at 6.3 million. What that stands for is revenue over expense for the first 6 months of the fiscal year on the Medicaid side. And then you'll notice something curious, and that is underneath it is current year other fund sources. This is hard to explain. When you take a single stream replacement, and we were asked to fill in that hole of 14.9 million, that is taken from the equity part of the finance sheet, of the balance sheet. It is not revenue. A way to look at it, and I was trying to fish around for an example, is today I worked, so I incurred income on an accrual basis for today. On my way home, I'll use my debit card to pay for gas. That's cash that I used. It was for an established expense. That cash that I'm using is not revenue. It's taken from my net worth in order to pay for an expense. And that's what this reflects. So yes, when you replace the reduction in single stream with our funds, you end up under other funds with a negative balance. That negative balance will increase until it gets to about 14 million plus by the year end. So that's what this looks like. It's a hard concept to communicate, but in essence, when you use fund balance dollars, it is not on a balance sheet a revenue item. It is paying cash. It is paying cash for an existing expense. We will cover that expense, but it is not revenue. Total liabilities and fund balance then stands for the period at $137,196,703. Any questions about the balance sheet? Okay. Going to the next finance sheet, the analysis of revenue and expenditures, I will go to the first summary tab on the left side, which talks about Medicaid. Medicaid on the service side, revenue stood at $136.1 million, expense at $131 million. So revenue over expense on the service side for Medicaid was at 5.1. Administrative revenue stood at 17.5, expense at 14.3 million, so revenue over expense on the administrative side at approximately 1.2 million. So total on the Medicaid side of things stood at 6.3, just under that. Going to the next grouping under state and federal, again on the service revenue side stood at 29.1. Expenses were greater at 33.4 million, so expenses exceeded revenue by about 4.3 million. On the administrative side, revenue stood at 1.3 million, expenses at 3.2, so indeed expenses exceeded revenue at 1.8 million, thereabouts. So total expense over revenue stood at about 6.1 on the state and federal side. Going to the total column for all sources, which is the last column on that sheet, service revenue for the period stood at 169.2 million, expenses at 166.3, so revenue over expense was at 2.9 million, thereabouts. On the administrative side, revenue stood at 19.6, expenses at 19.5 million, so revenue over expense at a little over $100,000. So for the entire period, from all sources, revenue exceeded expenses for the year at $3 million, just under that. Any questions about this?
Yeah.
Okay, the final finance sheet, which is the cash flow statement, and this measures just the movement of cash from the beginning of a period to the end of the period. Net income from operations stood at a negative 5.9 million. Let me explain that. This is the movement of cash. This is not accrual. In any one given period, more will go out of the door in cash than comes in terms of revenue. From other sources of cash, and this is the interplay between accounts receivable and accounts payable, there was a positive balance of 4.1, 4.2 million. So that for the period, the net cash flow out was at 1.77 million. So at the beginning of the period, cash and cash equivalents at the beginning of the period was at 101.4 million, and at the end of the month of December stood at 99.66 or 99.67 million. Any questions about the cash flow statement? Just generally speaking, going to what we call the clinical services budget, also labeled here as the Medicaid budget, the actual as of December 2015. I will just go through some of the summary rows under total Medicaid D. These are the mental health services. For the period, we were a little under budget at about $500,000 in innovation, which is Medicaid C, a little over at $76.5 thousand. Under Medicaid B, 3, under quite a bit at $796,000 plus. So under the clinical services, and just that, for the period, stood at a positive balance of $1.22 million, thereabouts. I will not go through the dashboards in any comprehensive sense, but there were some things that are unusual that stick out, that will remain to stick out for the balance of the period. So I will review a few of them. I'm looking at dashboard number 1. It's called Smoky Mountain LME MCO Medical Expense Ratio, Medicaid Funding Services. It stood fairly consistently since the beginning of the fiscal year at about 96%. What that literally means is out of every dollar of Medicaid service that we, in terms of revenue that we received, 96 cents of it all went out the door, 96% of it. And then you go to the medical expense ratio for state and federal sources, and you see that's really, really out of whack. It's really, really out of whack because we are using equity funds from our fund balance to make up for single stream replacement. Therefore, our expenditures on the state and federal side are greater than our revenues on the state and federal side. And that's where it appears. And this will continue to be the case for the entire balance of the fiscal period. Questions about that? And you'll see the same patterns when you look at the next sheet. As far as administrative expense ratio, you see the same pattern as well. Just going to 2, we're going to look at the Medicaid current ratio. Under Medicaid, it stands at 2.85. Again, this is current assets over current liabilities, so it's a ratio between those two. And overall, the total current ratio stood at 3.75. You will notice it's going to start to trend down, and it will continue to trend down for the balance of the period. Again, because of single stream replacement, our expenses on the state and federal side are greater than the revenues on that side. We're replacing it. That is not revenue, so you will see these current balances. This current ratio continue to decline to the end of the period. I, in the interest of time, will not go through the rest of the dashboard unless someone has a specific question. Okay, hearing none. This is revision, budget revision number 4. It's only February and we're at budget revision number 4. I will go through the second column, and that's and describe it line item by line item. I will go through them quickly, but certainly interrupt me if you have questions. The first item under other revenue is $50,000 for increase in wellness committee revenue. Recall that for our employees, we contract with Coventry. Part of that is a service in reference to promoting an internal wellness program. Given our level of performance, meaning our medical expense ratio, as far as our own health care benefits, we are able to fund from Coventry an internal wellness program for our employees, and that increase this year is $50,000. $23,000 came from an increase in COBRA insurance revenue. This comes from former Smoky employees who are continuing to receive our insurance, and there's a COBRA contribution involved in that. So that's $23,000 for the period. For both of these items, there's a countervailing expense to this revenue. Going further down on that sheet, there's something called fund balance appropriated. This is where, for budgetary purposes, we're taking out of the equity portion of the balance sheet and moving it into operations. So $983,168. $52,786 will go to the relevant contracts for e-learning, which is part of the Integrated Care Initiative. $40,000 go to Adapt Pharmacy, and this is also part of the Integrated Care Initiative. $393,660 $1,063 is for the CMT portal. This goes to the 5 comprehensives as far as integrated care initiative as well. $10,568 goes to a consultant as far as the integrated care initiative. $50,000 is to Sirius Contracts. Sirius is spelled S-I-R-I-U-S. This is a major contract vendor as far as data is concerned, and this is specifically in terms of data security. And this is a professional service. $266,175 is to Fleischman Hillett contract, and this is as far as the technology summit that Stephen had described earlier. $7,800 goes to cover the Asheville Events Company contract, and this is again in reference to assistance on the technology-enabled care initiative. $139,290 is for this operating year as far as replacement of bridge funding. $22,000 comes to the Endion contract. This has to do with the data center. We are actually renting space to relocate the data center rather than moving it here, and that's the current cost for it. $254,155 is a decrease to single stream funding on the administrative side that we're making up for. If someone needs an explanation for that, I can certainly give them a detailed one. $514,666 for single stream funding replacement as far as the service side. $840,000 is an actual increase in state non-UCR funds, and this comes from a division allocation of recurrent funds for TASK, T-A-S-K, Treatment Alternatives for Safer Communities. $73,713 to increase federal non-UCR child SA prevention funds. This is specifically for the Mission Foundation Fetal Alcohol Prevention Program. $11,700 is for 40 substance use disorder training scholarships for attendance at the Mayheck Women's Recovery Conference. And this is also one-time funding. I won't go through the expense side, which is simply a reflection of the revenue that I had communicated. So, all of those adjustments come to, no, I'm not Vanna White. As of the last revision that occurred on December 10th, the total budget, both on the revenue and expense side, was for $389,662,433. The total revisions that I'm talking about here net to an addition of $2,242,092, so that this revision, the proposed revised budget, would stand at $391,904,525. Question?
All that being said, we need a motion.
You need a motion
to approve. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Greg, you got anything else?
I'm done.
I do want to point out that everybody should receive a copy of the Smoky Mountain Center Internal Controls Assessment. The Finance Committee talked about the report for some time, approved it. We asked for the staff to report back in 90 days back to the Finance Committee. And we need the board to approve it this time or wait till. Okay. The only other thing we have, I know you're checking things. Community and Capital Reinvestment Resolution. Tracy's going to read that.
So this is based on the information that Brian provided to you. This would be a resolution of the Smoky Mountain Board of Directors to reassign certain fund balance allocations for the purpose of community and capital reinvestment initiatives. Wherefore, the Board of Directors for Smoky Mountain LME MCO resolved at its June 30th, 2015 board meeting that Smoky transfer funds from the fund balance to the operating budget for development of specific community projects, including but not limited to expansion of facility-based crisis centers, integrated care development across the Smoky provider network, ICFMR rate increases, group home bridge funding, projects to address opioid addiction and other substance use disorders, and funding to increase the use of healthcare technology. And wherefore, Smoky's executive leadership identified additional community reinvestment initiatives that would improve access to care, quality of care, and the lives of the communities and people we serve. And such initiatives are identified on the attached Community and Capital Reinvestment Plan, which is that document in your packet. Now therefore be it resolved that the board shall approve the transfer of up to $10 million from the fund balance to the operating budget for development of the projects identified in the attached Community and Capital Reinvestment Plan and any other community or capital reinvestment projects or Medicaid reform initiatives identified by Smoky executive leadership. In approving this resolution, the board specifically acknowledges that the amounts on the attached Community and Capital Reinvestment Plan are estimates of the cost involved in each project and grants the authority to Smoky executive leadership to adjust amounts expended on individual projects as needed within the $10 million limit.
Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, make a motion that the resolution be approved for the community capital investment plan.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion or any questions? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Unanimous. Okay. Is there any other business? Is there a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And we have dinner right outside the door, so don't forget that.
You can.
Good to see you.